All right, so for this video, we get to get into some fun stuff, some real interesting stuff. We're going to talk about strategy, campaigns. Now, here's the thing. If you look at the screen up there, you see the letters, see how they're in green? That's intentional because the key for this topic is money, 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 money. Now, if that doesn't stick in your mind, guess what will? Benjamin Franklin's. It's all about the Benjamins. So what this is about is strategy and campaigns is all about how communication can demonstrate that it can pay the bills, right? So how does it demonstrate its worth? It's through being strategic and then doing campaigns to demonstrate its value. So that's really what it's about. So I want you to remember that. Old Benjamin Franklin, that's what it's about. So we're going to circle back to that theme a little bit, but the goal for what strategy and campaigns is all about as it relates to professional communication within organizations, and we'll talk a little bit about how it impacts society as well, is really, I'm going to give this goal to you at the beginning. I'm going to put the lead right where it belongs. It's all about understanding how to close the gap between vision and reputation through messaging techniques and campaigns. So if you remember, we were just talking last week about the idea of, if your vision is out of alignment with what your stakeholders want, then what are you going to do about that? Well, that's where strategy and campaigns comes in. So let's jump in. But before we do that, I want to do just a little bit of a recap, a real quick recap here. And we started off talking about stakeholders, right? And one of the things that I talked about was that there arguably is no concept that's more important in terms of communication within an organizational setting than stakeholders. That's really what this class is about, right? Is organizations communicating with important stakeholders in society. So stakeholders we talked about. Then we talked about how it's important for organizations to have two-way dialogue with stakeholders, right? Not just a persuasive strategy, not just informational strategy, but to have two-way dialogue. And so and really what it's all about is trying to maintain a favorable image or favorable reputation with those stakeholders that the organization is dependent on for its survival. And so again, this course is focused around organizations and society. And so that kind of gives you a sense of why that's important, because organizations depend on those stakeholders. Then now what we're going to talk about is how can we be strategic about making sure that the image, reputation, the vision, the culture, all those things are aligned. And we're going to get to there by talking about process and content. The important thing is not so much the order there, but really just making sure that they're both there, right? You can't focus on just what you're trying to accomplish, but you got to focus on how you're going to get there as well. So that's kind of a little recap to put some context on where we have been and where we're going now. All right, so let's look at what strategy is and figure out kind of what it's all about. So here's a couple of things to think about. It's really all about what is it's an organization assessing its current reputation. And this is any organization, whether it's a small nonprofit all the way up to, a big corporation, figuring out what its reputation is and where it's trying to go, right? And like thinking about where's the gap, right? Like between who we are and how people see us and how we would like to be seen, right? And the bigger that gap, the more work needs to get done to try to shorten that gap. That's really what it's about. That's what in terms of, if you're being strategic about what, this is it. So what professional communications folks do then is they think about what that gap looks like and they form what's called a strategic intent, which is the general direction or the change they want to go to. We'll unpack that as we go. So with that in mind, the intent or the change could be to better align how people see us with how we'd like to be seen. Or if we have a really good reputation, we want to reinforce that by telling people the good things that we're doing. And so that's kind of what that general direction change could be, either continue what we're doing or try to close the gap a little bit. Okay. So let's look then, for instance, at Walmart. Walmart has touched on a couple different points in the book. It's also just happens to be a good case study or a target, if you want, because it's talked about, they're massive, right? They're just kind of an easy target in a lot of ways to talk about. So if you think about their vision, right, they want to be seen as a low cost, quality goods provider, basically, right? Like no matter what you do, no matter what you're looking for, you're going to save money at Walmart, right? Save money, live better. That's what they want to be seen. What they're unfortunately seen as is, basically like Godzilla or King Kong, right? Like they're so massive that all they're doing is destroying small businesses, and they sort of prey on small businesses, that kind of thing. They don't take care of their employees, right? So you get here, basically that they're doing a lot of damage in the community. So one thing I would ask you is, what are some things that they've done to sort of bring this into alignment, right? To shorten this gap. And so you might think about, one of the things that they've been doing is they've been trying to come out and talk a lot about, doing good in the community, about the benefits for employees that they offer, and all those different types of things. So bottom line is the gap between what they want to be seen as and what they currently are is pretty wide. So they've had to be strategic about how to close that. Okay, so let's move in a little bit. And this is going to, again, come back to this idea of it being about the money. But one thing that we've seen as an evolution in professional communication within organizations is really the close link between what the business is doing as a whole, right? It's corporate strategy. So corporate strategy is all about, its consumers and its marketing, its markets, right? Who it's going after, business strategy. And then communication strategy is how do we, sort of tell people about that? Who are we going to be doing, advertising to and marketing to, and public relations and public affairs, all those different kinds of things. And so what communication folks' role is really all about sort of trying to translate corporate strategy into communication strategy so we can tell our people outside of our corporate bubble what we're doing. And then we're trying to inform corporate strategy on how stakeholders are reacting, right? So for instance, an organization makes a big decision or decides, for instance, to, let's just pick one, right? They decide that they're going to volunteer and they're going to send people to go participate in the Pride Parade, right? The Pride Parade. Well, what we would then do is that's a strategic move, right? To go partner in that parade. So then they would translate that into the communication folks and say, we want you to go ahead and communicate about that. So then the communication folks would then inform corporate strategy or inform corporate and how that's going to impact their image, reputation, how much, all those kinds of things, even how much it's going to cost. So again, it's a close link, right, between these kinds of things because corporate folks need to make decisions in the context of all their stakeholders, right? And so to understand all those different stakeholder links within society. All right, so with that in mind, let me show you just a couple of other things on here. So then the question then becomes, okay, what's the content we want to focus on to make sure we can sort of make sure we have good relationships with our stakeholders from a communication standpoint? So it's really all about forming a strategic intent. And your book talks a lot about intent, right? Shortening that gap through various different kinds of messages that they talk about as themed messages. So for instance, a few years back, the Walt Disney Company wanted to be seen as being friendly to veterans. So they came out with a lot of emotional messages that were themed messages targeted at that community and welcoming veterans into their business. And then that leads into messaging style. So you have your rational messaging style, your emotional messaging style, your industry specific messaging styles, etc. And so this is in the book, so I don't want to go through it a whole lot, but just to kind of give you a sense of the overall flow of how things may go within an organization. And I want to show you this so you can see that it's a pretty massive process. But basically, your reputation and vision, if they're misaligned, you see all the process, right? Objectives, target audiences, theme messages, and at the very end, prepare the budget. We're going to talk next about media strategy in the next unit. Research, right, in terms of what kinds of research an organization can do to figure out what goes into their strategy, could be informal, just having conversations with people in the community, having conversations internally, but it can also be very formal, right? Doing surveys, and there's some entire industries, PR firms, for instance, partner with organizations a lot to help the organizations be more strategic about their communications. And they can outsource research to PR firms to be able to go into the community and poll and figure out what people are interested in and what would influence them. All right. So again, just to kind of recap here, I want us to kind of think a little bit about this gap, right? Reputation and vision, strategic intent, and then the close link between corporate common strategy, and then it's all about that content that goes into that. And at the bottom line is, where do we want to go? How do we want to be seen? How do we get there? And did it work, right? And did it work is all about the money, right? It's figuring out if it was worth the money that we spent.